When will you finally show your mother to me, Andrew? Holding the hand of her young boyfriend in a military uniform, the girl remarked, "We've been dating for months, and I still haven't met my future mother-in-law. I'll be taking a vacation soon, April, and we'll go see my mom. I'll present her to you," he said. The girl asked, "Do you think she'll like me?" "Naturally, she will. My mother is kind. She'll like you too if I like you," the man said with a smile. Amanda, Andrew's mother, was a villager. Her husband, who was also in the military, died 10 years ago. Following in his father's footsteps, her son also chose to join the military. His mother chose to move to the hamlet and give Andrew her flat in the city after he graduated and enlisted in the army. She had grown up there and had always wanted to go back, but she was never able to because of her husband's work, her child, and the constant moves. She so made the most of village life after she eventually relocated. She produced jams and preserves and had a small farm with a vegetable garden. She was never insulted by her son's infrequent visits. She knew what military service was like because she had spent several years living with her military husband. Amanda and her future daughter-in-law waited for their son. Andrew had told his mother over the phone that he was getting married, but he had spoken very little about his beloved April. "You will meet her in person when we get there, and you can ask her about everything," he'd stated. Similar to his father, Andrew was assertive and independent, but also a very compassionate and loving person. April feared she would be disliked by her prospective mother-in-law, as she believed it wasn't even because she wasn't attractive. April had barely completed high school and was not very tall. She was a single woman. The girl had spent her childhood in an orphanage. She was the kind of person that most people avoided. April was a modest, good-natured girl who painted houses. Although her job was extremely difficult, it had recently become more lucrative. She was frequently called to assist with repairs. In her spare time or in the evenings, she also worked at the factory. She never declined a chance to make a little extra cash. The government was supposed to provide her with an apartment soon, but in the meantime, she was living in a dormitory. On the planned day, April and Andrew drove to his mother's house. It was not a long drive. The village was very close to the city. They bought some goodies and gifts and planned to spend their weekend there. April was noticeably nervous and kept holding Andrew's hand. The guy, sensing her tension, encouraged her and kept saying, "Come on, don't be afraid. Everything will be all right. My mom doesn't bite." "I'm not afraid," the girl replied. As they walked through the village, they looked at the local nature and dilapidated houses. "Yeah, the village is slowly dying out. When my mother moved here, there were a lot more people living here. People were living in all these houses, and now look at all these abandoned houses," Andrew told his girlfriend. "Maybe they'll change their minds and come back. After all, it's often the case that a house is empty for a while, but then people return," the girl replied. "Maybe. The house we bought for my mom had been empty for years too. It took a lot of effort to renovate it. But Mom wanted to live here for a long time, so let her live here and be happy," the boy replied. Andrew loved and respected his mother very much. She had always been the standard of feminine beauty and the guardian of the family hearth. He remembered from his childhood how he and his parents often relocated because of his father's work and constantly lived in small apartments provided by the state for the army. His mother, crying into her pillow at night, sometimes complained of his father that she was tired of it all and wanted a normal life in her own home. She was tired of constantly moving from one city to another. As Andrew approached his mother's lot, he pointed at the house and said, "Well, here we are. What do you think?" "What a beautiful house," muttered April. Amanda's house was an ordinary wooden house. The only thing that made it different from all the other houses was that every year it was painted yellow and blue, and there were always huge flower beds outside. Amanda loved flowers. The first thing she dreamed of when she bought the house was planting large beds of her favorite flowers near it. Amanda was a brisk, skinny woman who could easily do everything herself. Of course, she was missing a man's pair of hands in the house, so whenever her son arrived, she knew what kind of help she would ask for. The woman greeted them very kindly. As they dined together, they got to know each other, and she talked with April. She realized that her son had made the right choice. April also liked Amanda, a very pleasant, hard-working woman. Her home was in perfect order, and everything was in its proper place. It was immediately clear that she was an excellent housekeeper. After talking with the children and asking them about their life plans, Amanda sent them for a walk in the neighborhood. The first thing April was interested in was the flowers. She loved flowers too. When she lived in the orphanage, she always watched their gardener tend the flowers near their porch. Little April would always go over to the gardener and ask about the names of flowers and how to take care of them. Sometimes she would even help. Looking at the flowers in the beds, April was thinking of her childhood. After walking around the village, they realized that everything was not so bad. Many people still lived there, and new houses had even been built in some places. Later, Amanda told them that many newcomers had moved into the village recently. After visiting his mother and saying goodbye, the couple left for the city. Andrew drove his fiancée to the dormitory and then went home. He lived on the next street. Carrying a heavy bag of goodies from his mother, the boy thought about the weekend when he and his mother were alone. Amanda had told her son that she really liked April. "She'll be a good wife for you. I liked April a lot. I'm rarely wrong about people." Soon, Andrew and April got married. After the wedding, April moved in with her husband. Amanda, leaving for the village after the wedding, instructed April, "April, you are the housekeeper now. Decorate this apartment the way you want. Renovate it if you wish, and make it cozy. I have a different home now, so the apartment is all yours. This is your home now. Andrew has lived here long enough, but it's still the same old wallpaper and outdated curtains. I believe you can make this place much more comfortable." April slowly tidied up the place. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and they decided to renovate it. She did everything with great joy. For the first time in her life, she had her own place. Her husband supported her choices and fully trusted her taste. Andrew loved April very much, spoiled her in every way, and with every paycheck, he always bought something nice for his wife. One day, when Andrew came home from work, he saw a mysterious expression on April's face. She was smiling and looking at him entreatingly. After washing his hands and sitting down at the table, he jokingly said, "Feed me, my wife." The table was already set, and all she had to do was put hot food on a plate for him. Sitting down across from her husband, the girl softly said, "Andrew, you're going to be a daddy soon." "Are you serious?" her husband asked in surprise. "Who jokes about something like this?" "I'm pregnant," the girl said modestly. "My love, my dear, now we will have a complete family." "Do you want a son or a daughter?" her husband asked cheerfully. "Andrew, the first child is always wanted, and the gender is not important at all. The only thing that matters is the child's health," April replied. "Well, I want a daughter so she'll look just like you, just as beautiful as you are. I'll call her my little princess. And then we'll have a boy too, so he can protect you and his sister." "Maybe he'll join the army like me," Andrew said cheerfully. April's pregnancy was difficult with constant nausea. Part-time work was out of the question, although she didn't need any extra income anymore. Andrew's salary was decent. They had everything they needed and didn't complain. They renovated their apartment and bought new furniture. Now, they only needed to save up some money to buy a car. It was Andrew's dream. They lived in happiness and harmony. April agreed with Andrew on everything. Every weekend, Andrew took his wife to his mother's house, away from the dust and noise of the city. He saw how hard it was for April. She was constantly nauseated, could eat almost nothing, and had even lost weight. Amanda always had fresh food, meat and eggs, which were very good for the baby. Childbirth was difficult, probably because April was short and very skinny. Andrew was worried about his wife. He kept calling the hospital, wondering if she had already given birth. When April finally gave birth, and they told him over the phone that he had a daughter, he was over the moon. After asking about his wife's condition, he immediately went to his friends to celebrate and relieve the stress. Andrew picked up his wife from the hospital with a huge bouquet of flowers and in a beautiful car, which was kindly borrowed by his friend Bradley, who was also his co-worker. They had studied together in military school and had been good friends since then. Bradley had also recently married, and their families were very close. Lisa, Bradley's wife, worked at the military headquarters. She was the daughter of their commander, a colonel. They named their daughter Julia. As time went on, the little girl grew up. Over the years, Andrew and April's love became stronger and stronger. They were not only husband and wife, but also best friends. That is very important in family life. One night, while lying in bed with his wife, Andrew asked her to undergo a church wedding ceremony. She cried with happiness and snuggled up tightly to him. Obviously, she said yes. April was a monogamous woman. She never even looked at other men after marriage. She was not interested in anyone besides Andrew. That's the way it should be in married life. The ritual of the church wedding spiced up their life. It wasn't that something had changed between them, but April understood that after the church wedding, they became even closer to each other. When Julia went to junior school, Andrew was often away on military missions. April and her daughter were often left home alone. April worried about her husband and was afraid that they would send him to dangerous flashpoints. Every time Andrew came back home, he devoted all his time to his beloved girls. It was very hard for him to be away from home. Often, when he was at headquarters, he would look at the picture of his wife and daughter and feel so sad that he could even burst into tears. Times were beginning to be difficult for their family. He did not want to have upset his wife prematurely, but he already knew that he would soon have a long and difficult mission ahead of him. A short time later, Andrew, Bradley, and their co-workers were told that they had to pack their bags and arrive at the appointed time for the boss. They were leaving for the flashpoint where the hostilities were taking place. Andrew, leaving and saying goodbye to his wife and daughter, did not tell April that he was going to the combat zone. He saw that his wife was so worried that she walked around the home completely lost and didn't even quite understand what to put in her husband's suitcase. "April, honey, don't worry. Everything will be fine. This is not the first time they've sent us somewhere. I'll stay at headquarters for a while, and then I'll come home," Andrew said before he left. She embraced her husband, inhaling the smell of his body, realizing how precious and dear he was to her. Crying, she told him, "We'll be waiting for you. Please be very careful." "Promise to be very careful. My girls, take care of Mom. Princess, listen to her and help her with everything," Andrew said. When they arrived at the combat zone, they realized they might not return home alive. The military situation was very difficult. Every minute their lives were in danger, and they tried to survive. Andrew wrote letters to his wife and daughter, keeping quiet about all the details. April missed her husband very much. It was very hard for her to be away from Andrew. The only thing that gave her strength was her daughter, Julia. She tried to spend more time with her daughter, chasing away bad thoughts. Julia was growing up, going to school, and attending different extra classes and activities. While her husband was away, April decided to get her driver's license. Before leaving, Andrew had told her, "April, make sure you get your driver's license because we bought a car. Who's going to drive it? Otherwise, the car will just stand idle." And now April got her driver's license and could drive. She and her little girl often went to visit Grandma Amanda. Amanda loved her granddaughter very much. Looking at Julia, Amanda realized she was very much like her son. Julia not only looked like Andrew, but she had the same character. She was strong-willed and stubborn but easygoing and kind. April and Julia often helped Amanda with the garden. She could handle it herself, but the girls were happy to help her, which made Amanda happy too. After all, it's very nice when someone cares about you and helps you not because they have to, but because they really want to. Amanda tried to comfort her daughter-in-law, seeing her distressed condition. "Darling, don't worry. Everything will be all right. He's not an ordinary soldier, he's an officer. I believe he is somewhere in the headquarters. Just believe in him and wait. That's very important for him." "Of course, I'm waiting for him. I have no other choice. I don't know how I can live without him. I don't need anyone but him," April said. They hugged. Sometimes they even cried together, and April felt much better. Time passed. For some reason, her husband was still not allowed to go home on vacation or even on weekends. That worried April a lot. She sensed something was wrong, so she went to see the unit commander. Arriving at the office and waiting for her appointment, the girl entered, said hello, and asked him a question right from the threshold. "Tell me the truth. Where is my husband? Is he in a combat zone? Did you send him there?" The gray-haired man lowered his eyes and realized that Andrew had told his wife nothing about the flashpoint. He didn't know how to answer the young woman's question. "Yes, I won't hide it from you. He is in the flashpoint, but there are no hostilities at the moment, and they are not in danger. So you don't have to worry," he muttered. April could see how nervous he was, tapping his pen on the table as he spoke. She realized there was something he wasn't telling her. She did not dare to argue or ask him about the details. April also decided to talk to Bradley's wife. Arriving at Lisa's place, April began to ask her what she knew about their husband's trip. Lisa replied indifferently, "What do you mean? What do I know? I know everything. They're in a flashpoint. There's shooting and killing. Don't you watch TV? Our husbands are in a combat zone." April cried, looking at Lisa. "Lisa, how can you be so calm? Why are you so indifferent about it? Why shouldn't I be calm? Yes, they are in a combat zone. So what? They'll fight and then come back. But they'll bring us a lot of money, the woman muttered. April could not control herself and cried even louder. Lisa, everything you say is horrible and disgusting. You're a military wife. How can you talk with such hypocrisy? Said April with tears in her eyes. Stupid. Why do you even care about that? You live well with your child, have an apartment, a fancy car, and you get Andrew's paychecks. What else do you need to be happy? The woman asked ironically. We're so different, April told her, getting up from the table. I need my husband alive. That's all I need. I don't want the money or a car or anything else. I just want him back safe and sound. After a while, April saw on TV that there had been a terrible fight at her husband's location. A lot of people died and hundreds were injured. That same evening, they received sad news. 7 people from Andrew's unit had died. Her husband was among them. It was impossible to describe April's condition. She was constantly crying and couldn't come to her senses. Her sobs turned into hysterics. Julia, looking at her mother, hid in her room. She cried silently and was afraid to approach her. The next day, Amanda arrived. The news of her son's death was shocking and unexpected. She didn't understand how it could have happened. They never talked about the fact that he served in a place where he could have died. A neighbor drove her to the city. He offered to help her, seeing her condition. Upon entering the apartment, Amanda saw April. Her face had turned gray from stress and tears, and her eyes were red. She seemed to have lost a lot of weight over the past few days. The soldiers' funeral was in their unit. They had died far from home, so their bodies came in closed zinc coffins. 7 coffins were on the parade ground, with pictures of the dead on them. It seemed as if the whole city came to say goodbye to its heroes. 40 days passed like a delirium for April. She cried all the time, forgetting about everything in the world. She didn't even care about her teenage daughter. Julia was left to herself. April's grief was so boundless that she didn't understand what was going on around her. She couldn't believe it had happened to them, and she hoped her Andrew was about to call or write a letter. But her expectations were in vain. The phone was silent. The mailbox was empty. When she visited her husband's grave, April would sit for a long time, talking to him, but she felt as if she were talking to a living person. She could not believe that her beloved husband was in that coffin. April recalled how they had met, their expectations of a baby and their happy life. Looking at her husband's picture, she realized they would never see each other again. Never again would he look at her, say sweet words, tell her how much he loved her, or embrace her. April felt so sad that she wanted to lie down beside him and just die herself. But she knew she had to pull herself together somehow. She had a teenage daughter to raise, and now was the time when Julia needed support, supervision, and motherly advice about everything. But April couldn't help herself. She didn't want anyone but Andrew by her side. In her heart, she hoped that someday he would come back to them. But those were unrealistic dreams. One day, on her way home from work, April met her longtime friend, Nicole. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. Nicole smiled and started asking her about everything. April, how are you doing? Julia must be all grown up now. How's your husband, Andrew? He's in the military, isn't he? Still in the service, you look so tired. Is everything all right? You've lost a lot of weight, said her friend. April realized this would be a long conversation and invited her friend home. Nicole, let's go to my place. I live nearby. We'll have tea, and I'll tell you all about it, April said, pointing toward the house. They sat at the table and had tea. April was crying, telling her friend everything about her life. Then Julia entered the room. She couldn't take it anymore, so she told her mother what she thought. The girl was talking and crying. She complained that her mother had stopped paying attention to her and had forgotten that she existed, that she was not herself anymore because of her grief, that the child had no idea how to deal with it. She tried her best to bring her mother back to normal life, but nothing worked. She said this so that her mother's friend, whom Julia remembered from her childhood, would do something to help. It was painful for Julia to watch her mother suffer, and she hoped that her mother's friend would help her. After that incident, seeing her daughter suffer, April finally pulled herself together and moved on with her life. Years passed. Julia graduated from high school and entered university. They still lived together, just April and Julia. April never got married again. She still loved Andrew and would not accept any other man in their life. At a family council, they decided that Julia was already grown up and could live alone in the apartment, while April would go to take care of her elderly, sick mother-in-law in the village. April visited the city and never left her daughter alone, but she completely trusted her. After Andrew's death, the child had grown up fast. For 10 years after her husband's death, April kept mourning. Then, one rainy night, someone knocked on the window. Her elderly mother-in-law said, "April, go check to see who's out there in the middle of the night." April, putting on her robe, went to open the door. "Who's there?" April asked as she came to the door. "It is someone you have been waiting for a long time," someone answered from behind the door. Everything clenched in April's chest. The voice seemed so familiar and dear to her. Her whole life flashed before her eyes. When April opened the door, she was dumbfounded. There was her husband, standing on the threshold. She turned pale, screamed, and fainted. He barely had time to pick her up in his arms. Carrying his wife into the house, he splashed water on her face. When April regained consciousness, he hugged and kissed her. "April, who's there?" Amanda asked from inside the room. April, coming to her senses, still couldn't believe it was him. She had waited for him for so long, and now he was standing in front of her. "I'll be right there. I'll tell you everything. Don't worry," she replied to her mother-in-law. Looking at him, she still could not believe her happiness. He looked older, with gray hair and a huge scar across his face, but he was as precious and dear to her as before. She hugged him. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she could barely speak. "Andrew, my love, I've been waiting for you for so long. Where have you been all this time? You have no idea how much grief we've had." "I know, honey, I understand. But the important thing is that we are together. I'll tell you everything, but now I'm going to go hug Mom," the man spoke softly. "Wait, I have to warn her first," April said, still hugging her husband. "Amanda, please don't worry, but I have to tell you something." "What happened, April? Who was that?" her mother-in-law asked. April looked mysteriously at Amanda and said, "It's like a fairy tale. It just doesn't happen in real life. I don't even know how to tell you." "Why are you talking in riddles? Just tell me, who is that?" the old lady said and tried to get up. "Don't get up, please, and don't worry," April said. She stepped aside a little, and Andrew walked into the room. Amanda cried, unable to believe her eyes. "It really is like a fairy tale. My boy, it's been so many years. Where have you been? What have they been doing to you?" The elderly mother could barely speak to her son. "Mom, I'll tell you everything. Is someone going to feed me?" he joked. With tears in their eyes, they went together to the table. At dinner, Andrew told them that long ago, in that unequal battle where many people had died, he was captured. First, they held him captive, and then they sold him into slavery. Him and 2 other soldiers. Now that peace prevailed, they were ransomed from the stage for their companions. But he did not want to talk about all the horrible, bloody details of his time in captivity. He did not even want to think about it. He would never tell his loved ones what he had gone through. He had survived only because, all these years, he believed he would return home to his family someday. He hoped and believed that his wife and daughter were waiting for him. He was very worried about his elderly mother, who must have been told that her son was dead. He had to restore his documents and find out who had been buried instead of him. When they arrived in the city, they decided to stop by the store. For Andrew, this life was different. Everything was new. He had to learn everything all over again. Everything in this life had changed over the years. After buying groceries, they went home, holding hands just as they had when they were young. Life changed with Andrew's arrival. April's appearance had changed noticeably. Her clothes were no longer dark and dull, but bright and feminine. Andrew was busy sorting things out at the military unit. Julia was finishing university. She had been dating her boyfriend for more than a year, so they decided to rent an apartment and live together. Her parents didn't mind. Andrew and April tried to enjoy each other's company and make up for the lost time. After a while, April realized she was expecting a baby. When she told her husband, he joyfully took her in his arms and whirled her around the room, just as he had when they were young. "Andrew, but I'm almost 40. "It's too late to have a baby," April said anxiously. "April, you're only 40. Millions of people have babies at 40 and do just fine raising their children. We've got this chance. It would be stupid to miss it," her husband assured her. April really wanted this baby, and she knew in her heart that her husband would never let her do otherwise. 8 months later, they had a healthy baby boy. They named him Bradley after Andrew's friend who had died in that unfortunate battle.